We are about to begin the Veterans History Project interview. My name is Tony Kierna, and I'm the genealogy coordinator of the Schaumburg Township District Library in Schaumburg, Illinois. I will be interviewing Mr. Neil O'Brien regarding his military service. Today's date is February the 5th, 2018. The interview is being conducted in the Schaumburg Township District Library TV studio. Also present in the room is Patricia O'Brien, the wife of Neil O'Brien. For purposes of full disclosure, I am also the brother-in-law of Neil O'Brien. Neil, thank you for participating in the Veterans History Project, and thank you so much for your military service.
You're welcome.
And we have no better place to start than at the beginning. So, Neil, where and when were you born?
I was born in Chicago, April of 1946.
Okay. And who were your parents?
My parents were Martin O'Brien and May Mulvihill, and they were both Irish immigrants. They came to this country in the 1920s.
Okay. And how about siblings? Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a brother, Marty, and he passed away shortly after I was born, actually only 4 months after I was born. So I never really knew him.
Okay,
you know.
Sorry to hear that you didn't have the chance to learn about your brother and experience him.
Right, yeah.
So, and now we get to the starting point of some of the good stuff here that we're here for.
Okay.
What were you exactly doing before you went into the military service?
Well, I had just gotten out of high school, and I was working part-time at a printing company in Chicago.
Okay, and what year would that have been about?
That would be 1964,
Okay.
right, yeah.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to Austin High School in
Okay.
Chicago, yeah.
Okay. And in which branch of the military did you actually serve?
I enlisted in the Air Force, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you did enlist, as you say, why did you choose the Air Force over all the other branches that were available?
Well, the Air Force, to me, had the better technical training programs, and at the time I wanted to get into the communications systems
Okay.
part of the business.
And what happened when you departed for your training camp and during those first probably very trying days of separation from civilian life into the military life?
Well, we left from Chicago, and there was a busload of us, and we left from 400 South Jefferson Street. That address is burned in my memory forever. But we took a bus to O'Hare, and then we flew to San Antonio, Texas, and on there to Lackland Air Force Base,
Okay.
which is the training center for the Air Force.
Just out of curiosity, was that like the first time you had been separated from home? That you had gone away on your own?
Yeah, other than maybe a vacation or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
So when you got to the training base, do you recommend or do you recall any of your instructors from even now?
Oh, I do, but it's interesting because we arrived at Lackland, it was about 11:30 at night, and we had to go through some briefing and fill out paperwork and that sort of thing as you're entering the base. So, like I say, it's 11:30 at night. We didn't get to bed until around 2:30 in the morning.
Okay.
And at 4:30, the lights went on, whistles were blowing, and Sergeant Barracks was standing there. Get out of bed, you slackers. So that was your first welcome to your first day in the Air Force.
Now, when you said Sergeant Barracks, is that a name or is that just the
That was
sergeant of the barracks?
No, that was actually, his name was Barracks.
Oh my God.
There was 2 DIs that were assigned to us, and it was Sergeant Mansfield and Sergeant Barracks.
Okay.
And yeah, and they were both pretty good people, really. They were tough. Those first 2 days were really.
So how long was your first training time period that you were there?
6 weeks for basic training.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how about after the basic training? What specialized training did you move into for the Air Force?
Well, I was assigned to Amarillo Tech School, so we took a bus from San Antonio up to Amarillo. And as I left Lackland, I was going to helicopter mechanic school.
Okay.
Somewhere on that bus trip, by the time I got to Amarillo, I was assigned to the jet engine school.
Okay.
So it was kind of like what Uncle Sam wanted at the time.
So even though maybe that was your initial, the helicopter training, it just showed right off the bat that you had to be pretty flexible right off to move into the jet training.
Right, well, they do a lot of stuff by your aptitude and things like that. I guess I have a pretty good mechanical aptitude, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. Being that this was so brand new to you, how did you find the process of adapting to the new barracks life and just the beginning of the new life in the Air Force? What were some of the challenging things for you?
Well, the first few days are pretty difficult, and I think that's true of any basic training of the military. You know, you have to learn the military way, and you got to get used to doing things very fast. Time moves real quick. Everybody is on you to do this, that, and the other thing, and you got to do it fast. So you have to make a lot of decisions and adapt quickly, you know.
Okay.
Which is part of the deal, I guess.
And just out of curiosity, like in the Army or something like that, when you got there, did an immediate haircut? Everything got cut off? Because at that time, in that 60s period, that's when long hair started coming in.
Well, that's day one. You go for your haircut, and then you get issued your uniforms and your clothing, and you stuff everything in a duffel bag. You don't try anything on. They look at you and say, oh, okay, you're a large, you're a medium, and they throw those clothes at you, you stuff them in your bag, and off you go. Keep moving down the line.
Okay.
The Green Monster, I believe, is what they called it.
Okay.
Or the Green Machine, not the Green Monster.
Now, when you were starting through this process, how did you feel was the food that you were receiving? Were the meals pretty good?
The meals were good, but you had about 10 minutes to eat, so there wasn't too much enjoying your meal.
Was there variety in the meals, or was it pretty much sort of meat and potatoes?
It was probably more meat and potatoes than anything else, but it was pretty good. I never really complained about the food there. Yeah.
And how about now that you were among basically strangers there? How did you find it easy to make friends with a lot of the people that were there?
Well, everybody's in the same boat when you're your first weeks in basic training. So there's a lot of camaraderie that way because everybody's forced into the same situation, you know. You have to make your beds a certain way. You have to have all your gear stowed a certain way, and you have to pass inspections. So everybody is helping everybody else before the DI comes in and checks you out, you know.
Okay.
So.
Did they have anybody in your group of something that was not successful enough that they had to sort of let them go?
We did, actually. We had, there was a couple of guys that they couldn't handle it, I guess.
Now, was it more the physical aspects or the technical skills you were learning then?
I think it was more a mental aspect for those people, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, how long would you say from the basic through the end of what your entire training period was? What was that time interval?
Let's see, that would be about 18 weeks, I think
Okay.
it was, all told. Yeah.
Okay. So at that point,
I'm including tech school in that.
okay.
Yeah.
So at that point, you were as fully trained as what the plan would have been.
Right. Well, you had when you go through the tech school, you're getting the rudimentaries. You're working on aircraft and stuff like that. But when you get to your permanent assignment, now you're working on a different aircraft and different engines and stuff.
Do you remember,
like that.
perchance, what some of those aircraft were that you were, like the titles of the aircraft or the models that they were?
Well, in basic, when we were at Amarillo, it was the F-100, and it was the J-57 engine in that.
Okay.
And that's So when my next duty station after school was at Holloman Air Base in New Mexico.
Okay.
And
So at this point, you went to another location for further training?
well, that was my permanent station. I was assigned to the 366 fighter wing, and there we were just receiving the new F-4 Phantoms,
Okay.
and they were powered by General Electric J79 engines, which everybody was learning the particulars about that engine at that time because it was just being delivered to the Air Force.
Okay.
So,
So let's say now that all your training is done, where did you actually wind up serving then?
Well, like I say, Holloman Air Base was my first permanent duty station. So we were there for almost a year, and then we were getting ready to deploy to Southeast Asia, and so we were broke up into squadrons, and I was assigned to the 389 Fighter Squadron, and we actually took temporary duty up in Alaska, and we were testing the aircraft for cold weather performance and that sort of thing. So I spent 4 months up in Alaska doing that, and then we returned to New Mexico at the end of December, I think it was, yeah. And then we deployed to Southeast Asia, Vietnam after that. And I left in March. Some of the other wing had left earlier than that.
So by the time of your deployment now to Vietnam, how long had you been in the military and the Air Force through that period of time?
That would be about a year and about a year and a half, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you arrived in South Vietnam, where did you arrive to? What town or what city?
Well, it's kind of interesting. When we left Holloman, a lot of the people left at different times. So I was assigned to be a courier for our shop equipment. You know, I had a couple of jet engines that we loaded on an old C-124, and I mean old C-124 is a World War II vintage aircraft. And we flew from New Mexico to Hill Base Air Force Base in Utah, where we had to land because we had a hydraulic leak. And so we spent a few hours there getting the aircraft repaired. And then we flew to McCord Air Base in Washington and spent a day there because we had to repair a hydraulic leak on the aircraft. This is true.
Not a good way to start, but I guess a safe way to start.
Well, then we left McCord, and so now we're in day 3. Left McCord, came back to McCord because of a hydraulic leak in the aircraft, and then spent a few more hours there. And then we flew to Hawaii, which was a normal stop, except we spent 2 days there because of the hydraulic leak in the aircraft again. Our next trip, we were supposed to leave Honolulu and then go to Guam, but we had to go to Wake Island because of a hydraulic leak in the aircraft.
What a way to start that
So
first trip.
now we're there a couple of days, which is very interesting. Wake Island is just a tiny little dot in the map, you know.
Wow.
And so we left Wake Island, and because of ground fire, they didn't want to fly this plane into Vietnam.
Now, do you
So-
remember again, what was your ultimate destination into Vietnam? Was it
The ultimate
one of the main
destination was
cities?
going to be Phan Rang Air Force Base,
Okay.
which was just literally being built at the time, you know. So my plane that I was on, it was just myself and the air crew. We landed at Mactan Island in Cebu in the Philippines, and because we had to take everything off the plane and wait for a C-130 to transfer this equipment, because that was more capable of landing in that combat zone, because, like I said, there was ground fire, and they were afraid they didn't want to fly that C-124 in there. So I spent a week in the Philippines. So it was literally almost 2 weeks leaving New Mexico to get to Vietnam.
Just out of curiosity,
Yeah.
do you think that even that week in the Philippines sort of gave you that first feeling of what the climate was going to be like?
I think so. Actually, it was all a good thing because, you did get acclimated, and it was, it's a different culture when you're going to Asia and that sort of thing. So it was interesting in that respect. So to me, it worked out fine. It was really good.
So now when you left the Philippines, was it that base that you arrived at
Right.
that was being constructed?
We flew into Phan Rang, And it was kind of, you know, as a passenger on these planes, you're not really thinking about too much. But when we landed, you know, of course I had all the equipment that I had to make sure got taken care of when we unloaded the aircraft. But when I saw the crew, the flight crew, and the loadmaster going around, and they were trying to find bullet holes on the plane, and they found a couple. You know, it was a little different experience.
So what would you say would be the kinds of friendships and the camaraderie that you developed with the people that were maybe initially with your group, as well as those who you met while were already serving in Vietnam?
Well, when we got to Phan Rang, we all knew each other for the most part because we worked in the same shop and that sort of thing. So it's really like a team, you know, and you have to treat it that way. It's just teamwork. Yeah, so you do develop, you know, strong friendships and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Would you say then you still remember any of the names of your closest friends that you developed over there?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I have a friend Larry that lives in Tenley Park that I'm still in contact with him.
Okay. Now, when you were there in Vietnam, and obviously I'm speaking a little bit now from the year 2018, when we know how communications are and everything is at our fingertips, how was it for you to communicate back home with your family?
Well, for the most part, it was by mail, writing letters, that sort of thing. You know, there was we did have a couple of those little reel-to-reel tape recorders, and I wouldn't do that very often, but once in a while, make a tape message and stuff like that. So
And how frequently were you sending letters? How frequently were you receiving letters? Did it ever seem like there was never enough communication between family?
No, I don't think so. It was pretty good, actually. I think, I mean, you wouldn't get anything for the first month or so because everything was just getting set up. But after that, probably pretty much on a regular basis, you know, and actually the mail had piled up there for a while. So, and then my mom would send care packages and stuff, and a lot of the other guys got care packages too.
Would you care to share what was some of the contents of those care packages?
Well, sure. For my mom, she would send cookies and snacks and stuff like that, and then she would send, you know, like toothpaste and brushes and that sort of thing, socks and underwear, you know. So, but it was you know, it was nice, and we would all share all of this stuff. One of my friends, Ralph, he's Italian, so he got all this kind of sausage and cheese and stuff. So it was a treat. It was a real treat.
I know we had mentioned too, and I am aware that the method of exchange was like tape recordings and stuff. Did your mom or dad send you tape recordings?
No, they really did. No.
Did you send tape recordings yourself to anybody else, other friends left back at home?
No. Like I said, the most part was letter writing.
Okay.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I bet you, I don't know, this is one of those things, because you were so isolated in a way, did you write a letter a week, a letter a day, a letter a month?
I would say probably pretty much a week or
Okay.
every other week, you know, yeah.
Okay. And did you have to be concerned about what the contents of the letter was, because the military was going to review it?
Yeah, there was some stuff because a lot of it was censored, you know, so you just didn't put down a lot of specifics and nothing about operations or anything like that, you know.
And the base that you had mentioned, were you stationed there your entire tour of duty in Vietnam, or did you move around?
No, we moved around, but Phan Rang it was just the 389th Fighter Squadron that went there. The rest of the wing, which was the 390th, the 391st, and 480th, were at Da Nang Air Base.
Okay.
And so, the 480th was Cam Ranh Bay, but about halfway through our tour, they brought the whole wing together up at Da Nang. for operational reasons, you know, so.
Any idea the size of the base in terms of how many personnel were there? Was this like in
At
the
Da Nang?
thousands? Yeah.
At Da Nang was probably the largest air base in Vietnam, other than Tan Son Nhut. Tan Son Nhut was down in Saigon. Da Nang had all branches of the service there. The Marines had one side of the base for their air wing. Navy was there, and Air Force. I think the Air Force probably had the biggest portion of the base, but yeah, all branches were there, really.
Is this the base that, with your training and that, you were starting to then work on the F-4 Phantoms?
Oh yeah, well, this whole time from leaving New Mexico, yeah, we had the F-4s there, yeah.
What kind of like maintenance? What was involved on what you did with the planes?
Well, when the pilots would come back from a sortie, you would have to check the engines, and you would debrief the pilots and see if they had any issues with the engines, like warning lights, that sort of thing. And you take oil samples and generally go over the engine. And then there was regular maintenance where you would pull the engines out and tear them down and reinstall them and that sort of thing, you know.
Sounds like a really massive kind of project. When
It
you
was,
have to do
yeah.
it on
Well,
a
we
jet
had
by
a-
jet basis.
Well, we had a regular building that was just a shop. That was our shop that we would bring these engines into. And if it was a real big deal, they would be shipped to Japan too, you know, if there was something that we couldn't do in the circumstances we were at, you know. So.
Did you get to know any of the pilots per se?
Yeah, I did. Not real well, you know, because they flew 100 missions. That was their deal. So they were probably a lot of them weren't there for a whole year. You know, it was probably less than that. But yeah, I knew some of them. I personally didn't know anybody that we lost, and we did lose a few of them, and some were captured. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I know that this is always, it sounds like a very hard operation that you're working under, you know, fear of anything going on there and stuff. But at some point in time, what did you do there for like recreation? What were some of the fun things you were able to do on the base even?
Well, we had, there was like a makeshift movie theater. They did have a theater there, so you would see, they changed the movie every couple weeks, you know.
Remember any of the movies, the titles they were showing?
Let's see. I remember one was a Raquel Welch movie, and it was 1000 BC, and there was literally no dialogue at all. But it was Raquel Welch, so there you go.
When also as part of any recreation, were you there long enough to be able to get what they typically call that R&R?
Yes.
Where did you go for that?
Went to Bangkok.
Oh.
Yeah, in Thailand, yeah. Which was nice, it was very interesting.
And how long of a getaway was that?
That was 5 days.
Okay.
5 days, yeah.
And then was it hard to come back under the base operations and everything that was going on at the base, I mean?
No, on R&R, you know, you had a plane, it was scheduled, you know, you had a plane that would fly us there, and then a plane to fly us back.
Okay.
But I went back there on leave, and that was a little more difficult because I had to get a hop there, you know, and try and get a plane back, which was difficult.
What would you say might have been the hardest part of being on the base in terms of, was it the fear of what could happen, attacks on the base? Was it just being away from home? What would you say felt hard for you?
Well, honestly, you couldn't really worry too much about being attacked, or you would just, you know, you wouldn't be able to function. Probably the heat was probably the toughest part, physically. I mean, Da Nang had the dubious title of Rocket City, and we came under a few attacks that way, yeah.
And was that pretty much any time during the daytime? Was it at nighttime? Was it any time?
Usually it would be like early before dawn, you know, like One in particular, and it was just about a month before we left, it was like 4:30 in the morning, and yeah.
Did you have designated places to try to take cover?
Yeah, there was. At the time, they were just starting to build barracks there before we were all living in tents, and they had just, and they weren't really completed all the way, but they had barracks there that that was a target, you know,
Okay.
and the pilots' quarters and our quarters were targets, and the fuel dump and stuff like that. Any place where they could exact damage, you know, was a
Did the
target.
Na-
They would try to do the flight line, but the planes were pretty well protected out there too.
Did they ever have any luck in actually destroying a plane or a fuel dump?
Yeah, yeah. Later on, after I had left there, not while I was there,
Okay.
but they had a fuel dump that got hit and it did quite a bit of damage. Yeah.
So now, how long totally were you in Vietnam before you were finally then disengaged there and coming back home?
Tour duty was a year, so it was probably a year and a couple of days, you know, something
Do
like
you remember the time, month to month of what year you were there?
that. Yeah, it was March of '66 to March of '67, yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I'll bet you were glad that when that end came, that tour ended.
Yeah, it was a relief, you know. You would leave. We left from Saigon, and you're getting on a civilian aircraft, which was nice. I still remember it was Braniff Airlines, and what was unique about that, the stewardesses would change their outfits during the flight.
Really?
Not in front of you or anything like that, but they would come back with different outfits on.
Wow.
And it was kind of like, as the plane was taking off from Tan Son Nhut, you're just getting airborne and you see the coastline and Saigon drifting away, you know, in the distance. And to a man on the plane, everybody was, yeah, as you're leaving the country, you know.
And on your return trip, was it pretty much in a similar vein that you stopped island by island, or how did you get
No,
back
we
home?
flew nonstop to San Francisco,
Okay.
actually, yeah.
And was
This
it,
was a jet plane.
oh, that's pretty good.
So we could do that.
Was it your entire group that was on the plane, or was it a mixture of other groups?
It was a mixture, and there was, again, it was a mixture of service people too.
Okay, so you had
There are Army, Marines on there,
Okay.
yeah.
So, and when and where did you finally arrive back home? Was it through where? What airport and that?
At O'Hare, and it was probably like a 2-day trip, you know. Got to San Francisco, and then it was at Traverse Air Force bases where we landed there, actually. And then we had to take a cab, I think it was, to San Francisco International, and then flew to Chicago from there.
When you flew to Chicago and arrived at Chicago, was that the end of your service, or was that just like a time period where you were getting back to life there, and then you still had to finish your military duty?
I still had a year and a half left.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long were you able to visit back home in Chicago?
I had, I think it was 30 days. I had a 30-day leave before I had to report to my next duty station, yeah.
And where was your next duty station?
In North Carolina, Seymour Johnson Air Base, yeah.
And what, was it still the same kind of work that you were doing, working on
Correct.
jet engines?
Correct.
Were you still part of the same Air Force group?
No, at Seymour Johnson it was the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing.
Okay.
And, yeah, and then I was assigned to the 334th Fighter Squadron.
And how many more movements after that location there were you still serving before you finally ended your military service?
Well, while we were there, we had a temporary duty. We had to go down to Florida for a while to MacDill Air Base. And then shortly after we got back to North Carolina, the Pueblo was captured, so we deployed to Korea, South
Really?
Korea.
I had no idea. That's
Yeah.
me personally saying that. I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you were back in, now where in Korea?
First operation was at Kunsan Air Base, which is mid-country and in Korea, south of Seoul. And then my squadron got moved down to a Korean Air Force base, Kwangju, which is in the southwestern part of Korea.
And how long were you then in Korea?
Well, the Pueblo was captured towards the end of, I think it was January 19th. I might be goofy on the date there, but we were from...
And what year was it?
This would be 1968.
Okay.
And we were there from we got to Korea, well, almost at the end of January, probably like the 25th or something like that, 24th, 25th. And we were there until July, I believe it was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you at some point, you finished your service there and you came back again, another return trip to the United States. And
Yeah.
did you still have service to complete yet?
I had another month, 2
Oh,
months.
and where was this service at? that you did?
Back in North Carolina, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
yeah.
now you get to...
We were relieved, our squadron was relieved by I believe it was the Ohio Air National Guard, took over our duties at Kwangju.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your total service at this point would have been, what, about 4 years or 3 years?
Yeah, it would have
Okay.
been 4 years.
So
yeah.
now you're at the point where you're disengaging from the military, you're now coming back to Chicago. I'm
Right.
assuming that was the plan.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And so at this point in time, now you knew you were back to civilian life. So
Right.
what was it like now coming back to Chicago in the time period that we know what was going on still, because the Vietnam War was still going on?
Yeah.
What was that feeling like coming back home?
Well, actually, flying back after I flew home from North Carolina and landed at O'Hare, and that was just after the Democratic Convention in 1968, which was, a lot of protests and everything. And that was still going on, you weren't too popular if you were wearing a uniform then,
Did your family meet you at the airport? How was that
No,
going? No?
no, I got a cab and
Wow.
got home that way.
And home was still the same location
Right,
that
in
you
the
had
city.
left from?
In the city, yeah.
And
yeah.
mom and dad were still there to greet you?
Right.
How about
yeah.
the neighbors and just
Oh, the
area?
family and friends, it was great, yeah, yeah. It was just the general public that, and to me, I really didn't have any incidents like that, that nobody attacked me or anything personally, but.
So what was life now readjusting to civilian life? How did that, what was the process for you? Was it a hard thing to do? Was it easy?
You know what, to me, it really wasn't, because the working in North Carolina, other than our deployment to Korea, it was pretty good. I mean, it was like working a regular job. So,
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't that difficult, really, to be honest with you.
Have you, since your deployment and since you're coming back into civilian life, have you been in touch with any of your former colleagues that were there in the same group that you were at?
Yeah, I have. Like I said, I had a friend, Larry, that lived in Tinley Park, and we've gotten together quite a few times. And then we have a 366 Fighter Association, and they have reunions every year. And we just attended one last year down at Dayton, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
So you really keep in touch with all of your colleagues that were out there?
Well, yeah, as many as you can. Not most of it's not on a regular basis, but yeah.
Are you a member of any kind of veterans organization?
I belong to VFW and American Legion. Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
And, yeah.
So you have fun at those places when you gather among
Well,
friends?
it's just camaraderie and that sort of thing. And the VFW has a lot of worthwhile projects and stuff like that, you know.
So what did you change, or how did you move on in civilian life? What have been some of your occupations? What have you been involved in since you've disconnected with the military?
Well, I went to work for Illinois Bell shortly after I got out, and was there for 28 years actually. So that was a regular career for me. And
were you able to bring into that organization a lot of your military training or military background?
Yeah, I think, well, probably mostly was your work ethic, and then working as a team and that sort of thing. I mean, the job was completely different, but at the time there was a lot of veterans that were being hired by AT&T and the phone company. So we had a lot in common. When you were starting, there was a lot of Vietnam veterans that I worked with that were there. Yeah.
So you even made more connections with other military people?
Right,
who just worked.
it's part of a club. That's kind of an odd word for it, I guess, but yeah, you have a lot of things in common that way.
Yeah.
And you know how to work with each other, so.
I do want to just switch into some of our last series of questions here that I'd like to ask, and this is the area that we call on reflections. So how would you say that your wartime service in Vietnam at the time has affected your life?
I don't know, I guess I have thoughts about war and how it should be absolutely a last resort, I don't think it's something that the government should take lightly, and they probably don't, but to me it should definitely be a last resort. I think it's tough what's going on, now. So.
What would you say are some of your own life lessons you learned from being in the military?
I don't know, I guess just a certain amount of discipline and working with other people and understanding other people and their cultures and that sort of thing.
What would you say it would be like even I know we're in the year 2018 now versus when you were in 1964. What would be your feelings about the military in general today?
Oh, I have nothing but highest regard for the people that serve in the military. A lot of these people today, they're on third and fourth tours of duty in combat zones, and it's a shame that it has to be that way. But they give a lot.
They do.
Yeah.
What would be, and this is sort of a futuristic view from your service and all that we've been talking about here today, would you say you have a message that you'd like to leave for any future generations who will hopefully even be seeing you right now via this interview?
Well, I would say, as far as somebody growing up in this country, and something that they should think of is participate in your country, and it's very easy. Just vote. Number one thing, vote, and if you can serve your country one way or the other. It doesn't have to be the military. It could be volunteering for some other thing. But give something back. That's the way we keep our country strong. I mean, that's.
Here's your opportunity, because I know I've gone through and I've asked you a lot of questions, but is there anything that maybe I haven't touched on that you've thought about that you'd like to add to this interview?
I don't know.
Or have I been a good interviewer?
I think you've been a pretty good interviewer, Tony. This is very good. Yeah. So, I mean, this whole project, I think, is very well worthwhile. So.
Good.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I'm so glad that we have this chance and we have the facilities here to do this.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, if you have nothing else to add, then what I would do is I'd like to conclude our interview with Mr. Neil O'Brien. And thank you, Neil, for your participation in this Veterans History Project And thank you again so much for sharing with us your story of your military service. Thank you again very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Tony.